Hello everyone, BlenderManTutorials here, and today I'm going to continue our Unity 5 game design tutorial series with scripting our character movement. So first we're going to look into the basic components of a C# script, and I'm not going to go into detail about the scripting language itself, but if you guys do want me to do a tutorial series on C#, I would be more than welcome to. So once we go over the components of C#, we're going to create a simple game object that will act as our character, and with this game object we're going to make it move inside our game world. So here I have my scene, and I've added this sphere. You can do that by right-clicking in the hierarchy and selecting a 3D object sphere. So now that I have that sphere, I want to add a component to it that is a script. So I'm going to right click in the project, create a C# script, and I'm going to call this character move. Now when naming your script, you can't have any spaces because the C# language doesn't allow for that, and it won't recognize this script name otherwise. So I've created this character move. I'm going to drag and drop it onto my character. And now we see that it's attached to our sphere. So if I right click on this character move, it will open it in MonoDevelop. I'm in MonoDevelop right here. It's loading. And there we go. That was a weird error. So basically the fundamentals of a C# script include the packages that it will be using to compile and run the script, so that's what these are, and the public class, which is basically our script. It's telling it to compile our script character move, and it's specifying that's a mono behavior. And that public means that it can be referenced by other things that are not inside this specific script. So that just makes it public to the rest of the project. Then we have this first function or method called start, and it starts off with a void. That just means what it's going to be returning, and in this instance it's not returning anything. Void means nothing, so it's not going to return anything. If you wanted it to return something specific, you would specify what you would want it to return, but for now we just leave it as void. And the start function means that it runs right when the game starts or when it's initialized. And the update function gets called every time a frame is rendered. So that means every time a frame is called, it will run whatever code is in here. So now let's get into the script itself. So if we want our character to move, right, we're going to need to give it a speed at which it's going to move, and we're going to need to specify what we want it to move. So let's first start off by specifying what we want it to move. So we want it to move our character, and specifically we want to move the rigid body component of the character. So I'm going to type private rigid body, and I'm going to call this character, and I'm going to end it with some semicolon. And this basically means that it's private, so it can only be referenced by this script. It's of type rigid body, and the name is going to be character so that we can reference it later on in the script. So in the start function, I want to get the rigid body component from our character, that being the item the script is attached to. So we're going to specify that character is equal to get component, and that component is going to be of type rigid body, and then we're going to put some parentheses and close it off. So this is saying that when the game starts, right, it's in the start function, it's going to grab our private variable character and assign it to a component that we specify as the rigid body for which the script is attached to. Now we go into the update. And so every time the frame is called, I want it to move. So I'm going to put a function in here called movement, or method. I keep getting mixed up between Java and C#. So this is movement, parentheses. So we haven't created a movement function yet, but we're going to do that right now. So we're going to specify what we want this movement function to return. So we don't want it to return anything. And we're going to call this movement. And it's not going to take in any parameters inside of these parentheses. So usually a script will have a parameter that will be of any type, let's say int. And this is basically specifying that it's going to take in a parameter when we call it, and so 15 is the, let's just, for an example, it won't actually do this, but for future reference, parameters go inside the parentheses. So now we have this new function. What do we want the function to do? Well, we want to get the inputs of our WASD keys or arrow keys, right? So Unity has the, it specifies the WASD and the arrow keys as the horizontal or vertical axes for inputs, right? So we want to get a value based off the input that we select. So I'm going to create a variable of type float. I'm going to call this move horizontal. Right, so that just means it's going to be a float value. That means it has decimal points, and it's going to be called move horizontal. And that's going to be equal to an input, so the input from our keyboard or our mouse. And specifically, we're going to get an input from an axis. And then that is going to be horizontal. So it's going to get an input from the horizontal axis. Then we want to create a new float, right? This float is going to be called move vertical. So it's going to be from our vertical axes, right? So it's just going to be equal to our input.getAxes. And that's going to be our vertical axes. So now that we specified our move horizontal and move vertical, we're going to need to actually simulate this movement within 3D space. So we can do that creating a vector3 object. And a vector3 is it's a reference to an x, y, and z position. So we're just going to do that with a vector3. And we're going to call this move vals. So this is going to be the value that it moves the object. So we're going to create a new vector3 object. This new means that it's creating a new object of type vector3. And that is going to get an x, y, and z axes. So we don't want it to move on the y axis, which is the axis that points upwards. We want to get the x though, which is the move horizontal. And then we're going to specify that as 0, and the move vertical. And that's my printer, sorry about that. And we're going to multiply this value by our previous, by a new value called speed. And then we're going to multiply that by time.delta time. So basically what this says is it's creating a new value based off of a vector3 that is then multiplied by how fast we're going, the speed, and by the time at which we are doing it. So then we don't have a specified speed variable, so let's put that up here. We're going to make a public variable because we want it to be referenced outside of this script. We want it to be referenced in the editor. And it's going to be of type float. and we're going to call this speed. There we go. And then every time movement is called, we want the character to do something. So the character dot move position, and this just means that it's going to move the position. It's a built-in rigid body method. And we're going to move the position based off the transform dot position of the object. We're going to add on our move vals to it. I'm going to close that off. And so this whole movement function, it creates two variables that take the inputs of our horizontal and vertical axes from the keyboard. Then it creates a new vector free based off those and multiplies it by the speed in time.delta time. And then it moves our character's position based off its current position and the movement values. So in this update function, it's going to call this method called movement, which is specified right here. And the reason I did that was to keep our code less cluttered. We really want to designate functions to do the work that are passed on variables, and we want to call those separately. So we don't want to have a big cluster of code in our update function. I like that personally, and I think that it really helps with actually controlling how everything looks and how everything is spaced out. So that's our script. If we were to go back to our Unity editor, let's go into the console, and there are no errors, which is nice. So I'll show you. If I delete this semicolon here and I go into the console, it will have an error with a giant red stop sign with an exclamation mark, and it will say that it is needing a semicolon, right? So then we just go back here and we put the semicolon back here. So that's kind of nice. It will tell us when we do something wrong, which is quite often. You will use this to your advantage. It basically means that it could not compile, and therefore you cannot run the code. You have to fix the code before it can be compiled. So now we have this character move script. I'm just going to specify the speed as 2. And then I'm going to run this. And so we have our function that runs the code, and it is moving around in our scene. So that was the basics to begin scripting a character controller, right, in Unity 5. And I hope this tutorial was useful. Comment on topics you would like me to cover, because again, I have kind of a general idea about what I want this series to look like, but I don't have a set in stone plan, and I would love to hear suggestions from my audience. So click the like button if you want to hear my voice again and continue to do videos, and as always, subscribe because the support really encourages me to make more. And the next video is going to dive into using the online resources to help with scripting, and we're going to use those online resources to create a mouse look script. Thank you for watching, and see you next video.